Yeah, for sure. And this was our most eventful weather week
Oh
of
my
the
God.
entire year. I mean, and it was a heck of a week.
Yeah.
And we said this, right? We said all year long, there was a period where we weren't getting a lot of weather. Sundays were maybe some wind, maybe a little bit of rain. We said, hey, listen, as we transition into fall and the winter, we're going to see some of these larger systems impact more games. And we saw that this Sunday. We had two extreme games that we issued. That was the Packers at the Giants, and then Baltimore
At the 49ers, yeah.
I'm sorry,
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, 49ers at Baltimore for the other extreme. And then we made some last minute calls on a couple other games that had some pretty bad wind, including Buccaneers in Jacksonville. We had the Oakland KC game as well that was impacted, and the Jets at Cincy. So an incredibly eventful game, and as we're going to talk about in this round, very impactful weather as well.
Yeah, we upgraded those 3 games to cautions that Sean mentioned. And that's why it's so important to follow us on our social media channels, because when we see these games where there's questionable winds, marginal winds, and the models come in stronger right before game time or during the day of, we're going to upgrade those games. We're going to be active. We're going to answer your questions on social media, on Twitter, at FFWeatherguys. So if you have any questions about how the weather might impact specific players, we're going to give our best shot there and tell you what we think is going to be or what might not happen from those games.
Yeah, and also what the other thing that we're trying to implement here is to get some photos of games where there is weather relevant conditions that may be impacting gameplay. So if you're ever at a game and maybe it's windy or if it's raining, snowy, we want those photos. We had a couple people send them in this week, and we're posting them on Twitter and Facebook and all our social media accounts and our website. So make sure you get those into us.
Yeah, we had a good pick of Eric Blake and his son there at a sunny Miami Dolphins game, which was probably a great game to watch when the Dolphins upset the Eagles there. So
awesome game. Helped me out fantasy wise, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike, I'm gonna ask you some questions. So we mentioned that this was a really impactful week. And just to kind of take a bird's eye view of some of these impacts, I'm going to ask you some general questions, and then we're going to dig into some of the specific matchups. But if I asked you, of the 10 quarterbacks that were in these relevant games that we've either issued cautions or extremes, so there were 5 games total, so 10 QBs, actually technically 11 because you had Nick Foles and Gardner Minshew in that Jacksonville game. How many do you think threw for over 250 yards?
Well, you would assume, I would think Mahomes would be a slam dunk call there. Jameis Winston probably has a good chance. Even, Sam Darnold at Cincinnati. I already would say right there off the bat, at least 3, if not potentially 4, based off of, I would say, Nick Foles, but I know that he got benched, so I can't go there. But before the week, I would say that. And he also had Lamar Jackson and Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I'm gonna say 4.
Yeah, I mean, when Aaron Rodgers had 4 TDs, he was lighting up the Giants, right? Yeah. But the fact is that there is only one QB of the 10 that had 250 yards, and that one QB only had 268 yards. And lo and behold, that one quarterback was famous Jameis Winston, who had 268 yards, but he also had 0 TDs. He had no interceptions, but this was one of his worst games fantasy-wise of the season as well.
Yeah, Peyton Barber had a big game this week.
Yeah, two TDs for him, and it was all in the running game. And so we'll talk more about that, but just to kind of highlight QB performance, right? And then if I asked you, of all these games, how many wide receivers do you think had over 100 yards?
I mean, that's a good question. I would say probably 2.
Yeah, I mean, you think 10 QBs, right? Of all the wide receivers, you had Jameis Winston, you had Aaron Rodgers go off, you had Lamar Jackson, right? You think that there would be at least maybe, 4, 5, 6 maybe. And there was only 2. And guess who it was? Robbie Anderson with Sam Darnold.
There we go, Robbie.
And Lazard with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball.
That's
so
right.
This was not the Chris Godwins.
Yeah.
This was not the Mike Evans. This was not the DJ Charks.
No Tyreek Hill.
Tyreek Hill. So these were some, Robbie Anderson, he's a boomer bust guy at times, but Lazard you weren't expecting. And so just really incredible. And then just overall with point totals, how many games do you think hit they're over under.
Yeah, so with all the weather games, I would say probably at least half of them hit the under.
Yeah, actually, all of them.
All
All
of
of them
it.
hit the under.
There
All
you
of them
go.
hit the under. So there was not one game that either met or went above the over under. So again, when we see these weather impacts, especially we saw extreme wind and extreme rain and precipitation and snow for the Giant Packers game, like this influences point
Yeah,
totals. Okay?
yeah. So let's transition here and let's start to take a microscope and break down some of these games here, Sean.
Yeah.
Let's start off with the Giants at Packers, and I think you can, if you're looking at our YouTube channel, you can see me in a jersey, and I'm actually wearing number 12, Aaron Rodgers, and this was because Aaron Rodgers defied weather. He just came out, gunslinger, threw 4 touchdowns, had a great game. He did have a low yardage, but it was unpredictable. He was my bust of the week last week, and he came out and showed me who's boss. He must have heard us and said, you know what, I'm going to prove Ventress wrong.
He did.
Come out here and just own it, and he did. So you know what, I have to tip my hat off to Rodgers. He played a great game, and
He did.
You know what? You know who didn't play a great game? Your boy.
Let me guess. Somebody on the Giants.
Yeah, pretty much all of them, right? They all pretty.
Yeah.
It was a disappointing game on the Giants, and especially Daniel Jones with his 3 interceptions. So.
Yeah, he had 3 interceptions and set up Green Bay to score. I think it was 30 points against them. It was 30?
31 to 13.
31. Yeah, it was 31 points against them. And Aaron Rodgers with the 4 TDs. Here's one thing we noticed here. You may say, well, why wasn't Aaron Rodgers impacted? Well, first off, it started snowing pretty hard in that game, but then it lightened up and then didn't pick up toward the end of the game, like in the fourth quarter, where it transitioned to more of an icy mix. But the Giants secondary was awful.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to cover guys. And Aaron Rodgers, in his pinpoint accuracy and the sure-footed receivers, were just making mincemeat out of them. And so in that case, like, that weather more negatively impacted the Giants secondary than it did the Green Bay wide receivers. Now, on the other side of the ball, we saw when the snow was coming down that wide receivers for the Giants were struggling. They were struggling to hold on to the ball. They were struggling seeing it because the visibility was down. Daniel Jones only had 240 yards. He did have 1 TD to Sterling Shepard, but he had 3 interceptions.
Yeah,
which gave Green Bay more opportunity.
Definitely. I think the biggest bust on my part here was that when I was looking at this game in the models, I was thinking that was going to be heavy precipitation. I was thinking rain. Wasn't hearing much buzz. I think the forecast came in a little bit colder than what models were showing, and that snow, when it happened, it was heavy and it accumulated pretty quickly on the field. I remember seeing some images on Twitter because I was driving from the holiday break back up to Boston, but I was surprised. That was something that really shocked me.
It was really, and they were right on that kind of that rain, snow, ice line. And some colder air did filter in and was able to transition to all snow for them. And you know what, like, this was one thing that I didn't see happening in this game is I expected Aaron Jones and Williams to get more opportunity. Jones only had 11 carries and Williams had 10.
Yeah.
And this was surprising because the last time we saw this was against Carolina Panthers, and Aaron Jones had 3 TDs. And Mike, I think one thing that you pointed out to me was like, hey, this is all game script at this point where Green Bay knew the Giants were this bad.
Right.
And they, in the secondary, that is, and they attacked it just as they knew Carolina was bad up front with
the running
rushing
defense.
Yeah,
Rodgers was so great. He didn't need to rely on the running game like we thought they would. He just ended up slinging 40-yard passes to Lazard. I mean, just an unbelievable game out of him. So is there anything else you want to cover this, or let's move on to the next game?
Yeah, no, let's move on to the other extreme game, and that was the 49ers at Baltimore, which both quarterbacks, both Jimmy Garoppolo and Jackson here, both threw for Jimmy Garoppolo threw for 165 yards, and then Lamar Jackson only threw for 101, but he did have 101 on the ground as well and a TD on the ground as well, but really low yardage in the air, and it was downpouring for periods here. I was looking at some recent observations during game time, and it was raining heavy, and then it was misty, and then foggy. The visibility was down. It was a mess.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar Jackson, potential MVP winner this year. I mean, he has such a high ceiling, even in these strong, wet weather games like heavy rain. He's going to rely on his legs, and he's quick and he's agile, and he makes the defense players miss him. So, he had a great game. I think Colin had the 49ers defense as his bust of the week. And I think it came out pretty good. They didn't do all that great, even in a weather event. I think Lamar Jackson is just so good that any defense that go against him, you want to get out of the way. And that includes the one of the best defenses in the league, the New England Patriots. We saw Jackson just turn them into mincemeat. And then the 49ers, he had, it was a closer game. Don't get me wrong. They got a late winning field goal to win it, right? But he still managed to find a way.
Yeah, and I think the big point here as well is that when you have, at least one, if not two really good defenses going against each other in really sloppy conditions, it's going to be tough sledding, especially in the passing game. And that's what we saw here. Because on the running game, you had some really good running on both sides of the ball. Like we said, Lamar Jackson had over 100 yards. Yeah. And then Mozart had over 100 yards, 146 yards in a TD.
Oh, what a game
of opportunity. Mozart, so I don't know how many of you played him out there, but he killed it.
Back-to-back good games.
The lead catcher for the Baltimore Ravens was Andrews. And Mark Andrews only had 3 catches for 50 yards and 1 TD. So this was kind of a slow play game, a lot of running, not a lot of attempts. Jimmy G only had 15. Lamar Jackson only had 14. Yeah. So this is what we expect in really, really rainy games. You're going to rely more on the legs.
It was a bit of a disappointment for Mark Ingram, who's been playing out of his mind so far, but I think Lamar Jackson made up for that. I mean, Ingram had 15 rushes for 59 yards, caught up 2 passes for 3 yards. So if you were relying on him to, hit that ceiling this week, it did not happen. So
I'm a little bit surprised. I thought he'd maybe get a little more opportunity in the air, but not this week.
All right, let's pivot on, Sean, here to the next game, and these now are entering the cautions. But if there's one last thing you want to say, because it seems like you do.
The only other thing I wanted to say is that, with your big play guys, like we anticipated Deebo Samuel to have a big, that maybe have a bigger game. He's been getting a ton of targets and a lot of volume. He only had 2 catches and fortunately one of them was a longer pass for a TD. Yeah. He only had 2 catches for 41 yards. So again, in these conditions, you got to be careful of those receivers that rely on maybe some of the deeper passes.
Right. I am going against Deebo this upcoming week in our playoffs. I'm hoping he gets his game gets tempered as well. Actually, to bring up one last thing, George Kittle. I started him in our league. Didn't have a great game. I think he's playing with a broken ankle. But maybe that's starting to heal now. So I mean, I guess it was pretty logical if we thought about it now, like playing with a broken ankle in a wet field, probably going to limit his action.
Yeah. So, did you get his stats? How did he do? How did he perform? I know he didn't do great.
Yeah. So I think for me in our league of record and in our half-point PPR, he only scored 2.4 points. He had 1 rush for -3 yards and 4 targets. He only caught 2 of them for 17 yards. Major bust there.
Man. Yeah, not good. And you know what? They're playing New Orleans next week, who's kind of a middle tier. They could play some tough defense. So they're I don't know if I'm playing. I have Samuel in a couple leagues. I don't know if I'm playing them yet.
Okay, let's go on to our cautions here. Let's start with the Jets at Cincinnati.
Yeah, and these games we put in late, and it was windy.
Yeah, these were all win games, by the way.
We're talking we'll start with the Jets at Cincinnati. Sustained winds 15 to 22 miles an hour with gusts of 30 plus miles an hour for the duration of the game. Sam Darnold, who I tried to put out because I did some research on him and I was looking at some wind data, and he does not perform well in the wind, and that showed this week. Only 239 yards, no TDs, no interceptions. And then you had Andy Dalton coming back, and he 243 yards with 1 TD and no interception. So between both quarterbacks, 1 TD. And again, the only really relevant wide receiver here was Robbie Anderson.
Yeah.
I mean, as you'd maybe expect, Cincinnati has kind of a depleted wide receiver core here with AJ Green out. But this game was, it was mainly on the ground. Mixon had a TD, but even the running game was kind of a little bit lackluster. So this was not all that exciting of a game overall. And what we're noticing in these windy games is they're not able to complete these long passes. They got to keep the ball shorter, so the yards per completion, yards per catch is less, and the defenders could get a better pickup on it because the ball gets held up in the air. So the cornerbacks, safeties, whoever it may be, have a better chance of getting to that ball and knocking it down to keep completions down a little bit lower.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty disappointing game for Jamison Crowder. I think he had over 7 targets and only got 2 of them for a couple of yards. And then big disappointment game out of Le'Veon Bell, right? You drafted this guy to be your stud running back, and he's not been bad, but he's just the mid-pack running back. He only had 10 rush attempts in this game for 32 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I'm a Jets fan. I was pumped to have Le'Veon Bell as a Jets, but I'm just worried now. He's just not the same running back as he was on the Steelers.
No, and then the Jets only scored 6 points. In this game.
Brutal.
I mean, and he did have 4 catches for 35 yards, but that's not saving your day with Le'Veon Bell, who's probably a first-round draft pick, maybe second-round draft pick for you. So it was tough sledding for him. So yeah, just not a lot of real relevant fantasy production here on either side of the ball. But Cincinnati did come away with the win.
I got to be honest, man. As a Jets fan, I am disappointed.
Yeah, how did you feel about that game? Like, what was running through your head when you saw the Jets losing to Cincinnati?
So
how did that make you feel?
It brought up the same feelings of when Miami beat the Jets when they were defeated. Literally, like.
So, let me ask you: would you have rather, because Aaron Rodgers was your bust of the week, would you rather have had Aaron Rodgers bust, or would you rather have had the Jets win and have like Sam Darnold go off and Le'Veon Bell go off? What option would you have taken?
Honestly, at this point, I want the better draft pick. So I was rooting for the Jets to not do well, just because they find enough to become a 500 type of team and just screw themselves every year. So
that is the Jets.
Anyway, let's not sit on this Jets saga because I can sit there and cry river all night. Let's move on to our next game, and this was Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, and this was our big QB performance of all these weather events, and I say that sarcastically because Jameis Winston, again, only had 268 yards, 0 TDs, 0 interceptions. But let me tell you, that's a hell of a lot better than what Nick Foles did, which was 7 for 14 for 93 yards and an interception, and got him benched. Gardner Minshew.
It is Minshew mania time again. Bring up the mustache.
And I'm excited because DJ Chark thrives off of Minshew. I'm playing him this week in a tough matchup against the Chargers, but I got to play him with Mr. America out there, with Captain America out there. But this game was nuts. I mean, we're talking gusts 35 to 45 miles an hour for this game. The wind was whipping, and
low-grade tropical storm.
Yeah, I mean, and Mike Evans was struggling. I mean, everybody on that team was struggling to get targets and get in the end zone. Barber was the big beneficiary here, Peyton Barber with 2 TDs.
Oh, disappointment for Ronald Jones. Did you hear why he was benched? He missed a block.
Why was he benched? That's
Ronald Jones missed a block early on in the game in coverage.
I did hear about, yes.
And he just got benched. That man has he's just no leash there. And everyone thought he was going to be this great running back, and all of a sudden now just freaking Barber just keeps doing it. I think he's probably one of the most annoying fantasy football players.
Bruce Arians for you.
Yeah.
Or no. Yes, Bruce Arians. I'm sorry, Bruce Arians. He's got that short leash mentality. I mean, you had Westbrook. If you played Westbrook, I mean, he got you 60 yards in a TD, but other than that, not really much to talk about here other than Barber and maybe Westbrook. It was another game that was heavily influenced by wind. And again, we saw a deep threat in DJ Chark only have 2 catches for 47 yards. That was only after Gardner Minshew came in. So again, that talk with the wind.
Yeah.
If you have these, outside receivers that are relying on those big plays, you can't count on that in these weather events.
Yeah. All right. Let's finish up here, Sean, and we'll focus here on the Oakland Raiders at the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, and the same story, different game. We had around 20, 25 mile an hour sustained winds, gust up to 30 to 40 miles an hour. And guess David Carr and Patrick Mahomes,
Oh,
people were looking at maybe even streaming Derek Carr.
yeah.
He got you 222 yards, a TD, and 2 interceptions. And
Yeah.
Mahomes, 175 yards, a TD, and no interceptions. So
He did save his game with a rushing touchdown, though.
he did. That's true. That's true.
Savage
Just
this
through
week.
the air, he just wasn't normally as productive. He only had 15 attempts. He was only about 50%.
Yeah, this was a game where
Um,
the Chiefs had just one pass of over 20 yards, despite coming into this leading the league in that category. So I think we saw 3 different Kansas City Chiefs actually rush for a touchdown. One of those was Mahomes, but we saw 2 separate running backs there. So,
yeah.
and I think the one reception touchdown was to Darrell Williams before he hurt himself, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, and Thompson got a TD as well, but a lot of the damage here was done on the ground. They scored 40 points, but a lot of it was kind of the ground and pound game.
Yeah.
Travis Kelce was the leader in that game with 5 catches for 90. Tyreek Hill only had 55 yards. One player I did forget to mention in our 100-plus club, because I was focusing on wide receivers, is Darren Waller, who came to life in this game as a safety valve. He had 7 catches for 100 yards. But, again, other than that, this game, it was mostly, on the ground and more of a defensive game at times as well.
Yeah, the one thing I want to mention, the kicking game seemed to be limited here. There wasn't that many attempts, but the both kickers did pretty well. I mean, Butker, he had, 5 out of 5 field goals, and he did have a 50-plus yard field goal. So, I mean, was able to overcome that win. So that was he
must have been going with the win. If he hit a 50-plus into 30-mile-an-hour winds, he must have had the win at his back.
That's a good point. I'm not actually sure which direction the wind was coming in and how that was relative to the field goal. So it's a good point.
Yeah, because we've seen other games where winds have been whipping and the weather's been bad and field goal kickers have struggled. And like field goal kickers in general are notoriously one of the players that are hindered most by weather like this. So I don't know. Well, good for him, because some people were debating playing him or not.
Well, I need Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Kelce. I need all these guys to come back to life here, because Mahomes has had some pretty lackluster weeks as of late, and I need this Kansas City offense to churn it out here against the New England Patriots this week. So, but luckily, there's going to be no weather here for them to really be.
But how confident do you feel about Kansas City playing them at home?
I don't know.
I should say at Patriots.
At Patriots. So I just have a feeling the Patriots are close to crumbling. I think their defense did amazing. They have a strong defense, but I think they were overinflated with their weak schedule. Now they're getting into some of these tougher matchups with no weather at hand. I think Kansas City is going to have a chance to win this game, and I think it's going to be on the back of Mahomes. It
could happen. I feel like every time I think that, though, Bill Belichick kind of figures things out somehow, some way.
Yeah.
We've thought that about Brady too. Oh, he's had some bad games. He's fallen off, and then boom, 350-yard, 3 TD game. It's hard to predict with them, but
yeah, it is. All right, let's move on and actually, let's play on that prediction component.